Great.
Totally fine. I'd like to just welcome everybody that I've just said a few moments ago. I'm Ingrid Jarrett with BC Hotel Association. I have with me today Elizabeth Vickery from our partners and Minister of the Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. And Elizabeth and I will be, I'll be co-hosting the webinar for you today on the details of the small and medium-sized business grant and the circuit breaker relief as well. So let me just do a little bit of housekeeping for you. First of all, I'd ask everybody to please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. We will be using the chat function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. And so Elizabeth will go through a slide deck with all the details, and following that, we have both the questions that you have forwarded to us when you registered, but we also have an opportunity to have live a Q&A with Elizabeth after her presentation. And I will facilitate that so Elizabeth can provide the information that she's able with the questions that you may have. So citing that it is now 2 minutes after 1, I think honoring everybody's time, I'd like to acknowledge I live and work on the lands of the Okanagan people in the Okanagan Valley, the Silks people, and I love where I live, work, and play, and I'm honored that they provide me the opportunity to be here with my family. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much, and I'm so honored to be here. I couldn't be a bigger fan of hotels and travel, and so I was thrilled to be invited. I know it's an incredibly stressful time for everyone right now, and so definitely happy to hear from you. Your tough questions are very welcome, I promise you. So don't be shy, and I'm sure you won't. As mentioned, I do have a bit of a deck, and so I'll kick us off and share that now. But yes, by all means, please use the chat at any time. And I'm quite comfortable with people taking themselves off mute and asking questions. Using your voice as well is all very welcome.
Elizabeth, allow me to, I just want everybody to know that we are recording this session, and we will be sending out both the slide deck and the recording in our communique on Thursday. And that will enable all of you who are on the call to share it with your teams or business associates. This is really meant to be an education session to encourage people to continue to apply for these grant opportunities for relief. And we understand there has been no more dire circumstance than the one that we're faced right now, and financial hardship is the single biggest issue other than certainty to reopen so we can in fact get back to business. So Elizabeth will provide us on these grant opportunities. You have an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have to ensure you have clarity. So Elizabeth, thank you again for being here. Over to you.
Fabulous, thank you. So I too am so grateful to live in British Columbia, and I'm from Victoria, that's where I live, which is Lekwungen territory, and just exceptionally grateful and thankful to live in British Columbia and Victoria, certainly given a pandemic and what we see what else is going on in the world. So a quick overview of the two grants, and I'm sure many of you have already taken a look at both websites, so I'll go fairly quick, but as mentioned, don't be shy about putting up your hand, interrupting, it's all very welcome. The two grants, so first is the Business Recovery Grant, and this has been open for some time. Back in the fall, it was launched. As I'm sure some of you know, we've gone through various iterations. It was really, quite honestly, too restrictive at the beginning. The worry was, and I won't fill you in on too much the history, the worry was that the need was so great that the money would go kind of overnight. And of course we didn't see that because the criteria were just too many. And I didn't invent the criteria, so once again, speak your truth, it's okay. You can say or ask whatever you wish. So I'm very happy that we went through a few iterations, and here we stand. At the moment, I think we're about 10,000 businesses that have been supported to date. We have many more thousand in the queue who are being adjudicated. As you can see, it's for majority ownership in BC. And I know we've had some questions on that, for a business up to 149 staff. The BC majority ownership, and I know that's a struggle for a number of businesses like yourselves, is all about demonstrating to the BC taxpayer that taxpayer funds are staying within the province. And I know that's hard because if perhaps you're an owner who lives in Alberta or internationally, I understand the money still remains in the economy, even with the grant. But these unfortunately were the guidelines that were given to me by our Treasury Board, our internal financial community and decision makers. And so afraid that does stand. I am pleased to say we are very generous in the application of that. So we're going as generous as we can, 50.1% of owners in British Columbia. And so I hope that helps a bit. The current deadline for the recovery grant is August 31st. I suspect it will be earlier, and I don't know the deadline. I'm working with Treasury Board on that right now, but I doubt very much it'll go until August. And I just want to be honest with you so that if you're on the fence about applying or you're in the midst of applying, by all means, please make the time if you can. I know it's incredibly hard and there's so much going on, but please make the time to finalize your application. The second, of course, is the circuit breaker grant, which is also of interest to you, which is fabulous. And I am sure you saw that we expanded that soon after launch to include hospitality, to include accommodation, which was also the right decision. I think it was great. And once again, we're so honored to accept applications for hotels and other registered companies, which is fabulous. The deadline for this is June 4th. That will stand. I don't expect that to be extended. I've been wrong about many things during this pandemic, so forgive me if I'm wrong about that, but it wouldn't hurt to also get your application in if you haven't done so. All right. Available funding, pretty somewhat straightforward. Both of this is on our website. So you'll see the recovery grant, and I'm sure many of you know this, based on revenue. So the base grant is on revenue, and then the additional amounts are based on staff. I know that some of the larger hotels, it's frustrating because perhaps you have more than 149 staff, and I'm sorry for that, I am. Once again, I didn't create the criteria, so I can't change it. But when we were asked for insight into building the circuit breaker, I was pleased to be able to make a pitch to make it just 100 plus and at least enable the circuit breaker to not have a ceiling for staff. And so we learn as we go. It's the best we can do, I'm afraid. Hopefully that answers some questions about the tourism. I know the tourism top-up was confusing to some, probably not to any of you because you're in the tourism industry. But there are other industries that had sort of questions about that. The application for the definition of tourism, we're using once again in a very generous way. It's simply attestation. I'm a tourism-based industry or business, and I have been impacted. So we're just taking people at their word essentially, unless it's really obvious that it's not, and accepting the grant and moving on. I'm going to pause for a moment just to hold space. See if there's been anything pop up in the chat. Not seeing any numbers in the chat. Ingrid, are we doing okay? It's okay, you're on mute, but I think
we're doing fine. I suspect that people are waiting to the end to
okay.
Questions.
Polite Canadians, we hate to interrupt people, no problem. The process, so for one, the recovery grant is 2 major steps. I fully acknowledge that our request to have 5 business documents can be onerous, and it's hard on some smaller businesses who don't have the time. I know how hard it is. You're running your business in the day and doing paperwork at night. It is what it is. It's once again the guidelines that were provided to me by Treasury Board. And so we're looking for 5 basic documents. The staff, I promise you, are very happy to help you, support you in finding those documents or coming up with ideas as much as we can. So once you're in front of a staff member, they'll be happy to help. And then the second part is this thing called a recovery plan. And many of you have probably already created a recovery plan. It was never meant to be a thesis, although our first iteration, I would say, was far too long. It was like over 20 pages, which was quite frankly ridiculous. And so thankfully, once again, we were able to pivot and streamline. And now, honestly, just a few lines on one page on how you plan to invest the recovery funds is all that we're looking for. The intent of the recovery grant, and just to sort of frame our minds, the principle really is to invest funds in recovery and ideally not in everyday fixed costs. So I'm sure many of you have done this, but any renovations, PPE, you know, all the usual things, that's really the intent of the recovery grant. The circuit breaker, and I'm pleased that we were able to streamline it further and we just request one document. The intent of that is really instant relief. So in the moment, and you are free to spend those funds as you see fit. So it's much more streamlined and easy to spend the money essentially. But sometimes it helps to understand why do we want a recovery plan on one and not on the other? It's the two different intents and principles. The business recovery about recovery, the circuit about relief. Hopefully this is making sense. I see 2 on the chat, but I really want to click on it. Let's see, what have we got here? I'm going to dive in. I submitted an application and I received a notice my application was accepted. When I called to learn, the next step was I was told the application assessed to meet the criteria to provide a business plan. I hope this information is correct. I'm sure it is, but I can easily, Sam, I can easily take your specific business examples away and look into them and get back to you. So by all means, don't be shy about highlighting your specific situation, and then I'll look into it and get back to you privately if that sounds all right with you.
Elizabeth, we have a question about the length of time it takes to turn around from application to receiving the money.
Yes, such a great question, and I know it's frustrating. So it depends, and here are the nuances. On our end, we absolutely have about a 2.5-week waiting time to get before an adjudicator. And I'm sorry for that. That was never the intention for that to happen. What we've learned is, and this is the general business community and probably not many or any of you, about 50% of the business community is not honestly quite very well organized. So they haven't done their taxes, they haven't registered legally, they don't have a legal business bank account. And so they're requiring a lot more work than we anticipated. And that's what's ended up taking way more time than we actually thought. We have implemented, of course, strategies as one does. You would be all familiar with this, ways to check in guests or applicants who are organized and ready to go. We're calling it a triage. Then we invite those people to do their own recovery plans. We're calling that fast track. When someone is organized and shows up and is fully ready to go, honestly, it's 5 days. The workload on our end is only about 37 minutes. It's not long at all. We're not taking hours to look through each application. It's more the support that about 50% of the business community has ended up needing to figure out what is a tax document or how do they register with BC Registry. So it's start to finish, it should be about 3 to 4 weeks. What's ending up is it's about 8 to 10 because we have so many people in the system needing extra work. What is also adding time at the end of this timeline is banking information. And once again, I'm sure all of you are organized, but many businesses are not, and they're entering incorrect banking information. And what happens with that on our end is basically the grant payment gets rejected and it comes back to us, and then staff have to like pick through every number and fix it. And unfortunately, that's taking quite a bit of time as well. So that's a long-winded answer of saying it should take about 3 or 4 weeks. It often takes 8 to 10, depending on how organized and how accurate the information is. Hopefully that helps, Ingrid.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just keep chatting, but please keep interrupting. I love it. Yes, go.
Elizabeth, I have a question here. It was sent to me personally. There is a restriction on BC majority ownership. And we've been able to identify the gaps on these programs, and they're greater than that. We have seen other industries receive provincial relief, such as forestry, to international ownership companies. Yet any property that is outside of BC majority ownership are completely left out. Companies employ BC residents, they pay BC taxes, they pay corporate taxes, they contribute to their communities. They're invested in the province of British Columbia, and from these people almost daily. And if there was one thing that you could change, this would be one of them we would ask you to change. It's a burden of hardship, and it's very difficult to understand. So I don't know if you could answer that.
Sure, and I really appreciate the honesty. And as I mentioned, the intent, the thinking is that taxpayer funds stay within the province. I fully appreciate that an international investor or someone from a different province would still keep these funds in the province and the commitment would be there. But this was the intent of that majority BC ownership criteria. I wasn't at the table when that was decided, and I'm sorry for the inconsistency. I know it's frustrating when one side of government gives different rules than the other, and it can be really challenging. So I wasn't there, but I'm happy to take it away and raise it again with my minister as much as I can. We've noticed the same thing too on our end, had tons of questions about this for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a way of putting the fence around the use of funds to ensure they don't leave the province and are in fact used for that business to recover. And I'm quite pleased to work with you should there be sort of support fences that or information that we could provide. Now there's two other gaps we've identified. One is if a property was closed for renovations, so therefore in 2019 they don't have a financial statement, but many properties have 20 years of financial background information, yet because they were renovated in 2019 they're ineligible.
Right, and so I'm pleased to say they can apply because we have had other examples of that. And I encourage you to do so if that's the case.
Great.
We just ask that people provide their 2018 books instead. The same is true for an emergency management situations, you know, fires or floods.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yeah, we're happy to go backwards in time and to 2018 if that's what is needed and look at those books instead. No problem.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I have one other gap, and that is new businesses. So we have British Columbians that have invested millions and millions of dollars in physical plant, hiring people, they're ready to go, and voila, what happens? COVID-19. So they literally do not have a financial statement proving operations and liquidity. But what they do have is the business analysis as to why they would have built that entity in the first place. And again, my ask would be for reconsideration, because not only are these people now operating on 14 months of zero revenue, but they've also got the risk of all of that financial investment that they've made in a community. And again, we have quite a few businesses like this that are currently ineligible.
I know. Those stories have come my way too, and it's heartbreaking just by virtue of bad timing. I don't know about all of you, but I personally was in complete denial in February, of 2020 about what was sort of going on and the potential impacts in the province. So absolutely understand. I've seen those heartbreaking situations and frustrating. I have raised them a few times. It's why I am pleased to say for the circuit breaker, it's just registered as of February 1st, 2021. So we did that on purpose to try and attend to much newer businesses, which is great. The recovery grant still stands, unfortunately, as February, 18 months in operation. So, every month that goes by, we go backwards 18 months in time. And I wish I had control over that, but I'm happy to raise it again as a concern. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. All right, should I just quickly touch on this? Probably we've actually been touching on it, which is fabulous. Sole proprietors, I'm delighted that we were able to expand the program and include those. I understand that a number of you are owner operators, which is amazing and a tough go. And so originally sole proprietors were not included, but are absolutely. We've touched on the 18 months in operation. This is for the recovery grant. I'm also pleased that we reduced the revenue loss criteria to 30%, and it can just be 1 month. So just 1 month during that time to show a revenue loss. Doesn't have to be an average for every month or anything. Seasonal, absolutely eligible, which may be the case for some of you. And then if you'd invested in your business back in time, so we can actually, you can apply the grant to any time from September 17th onward that you spent money on your business or invested in your business to recover. The grant funds can retroactively be paid towards that, which is great. Circuit breaker, some similarities, of course, sole proprietors, fabulous included. Accommodation now, which is great. That was one of the changes that we made, which was also excellent, I thought. Of course, businesses operation now, a shorter period of time, February 1st, 2021. And then, of course, hotels and motels included, which is wonderful. Tips for success. So I've touched on these a few times or hinted at them, but definitely it's best, it's kind of like, dare I say it, tax time. It's best to gather documents ahead of time and submit a complete package. As I mentioned, some businesses are really struggling and it just slows down it for everyone. And so best to just submit the 5 documents. We have a documents checklist on the website to sort of help print off and then hunt down those documents, which shouldn't be too difficult to find. They should exist. But by all means apply. Even if you're on the fence, we encourage people to apply. It just might take some time, but our staff will support you. And then I've touched a bit on the banking information. For some reason, some people are really struggling to enter the correct banking information. I honestly think sometimes I do this, I'm swamped, I'm busy, and I'm going too fast, and I'm not focused and getting the numbers exactly right. Or people are using it, they're using their phone and their fingers are hitting the wrong numbers. So please, I beg you to make sure your banking information is correct. I'm going to stop there. Any other questions come up in the meantime?
Great. I have 2 questions here, Elizabeth. How do we find the right qualified professional service provider? And the next question is, are there templates for the recovery plan?
Great questions. These are all great questions. So you don't need to find a quote qualified service provider if you don't already have a bookkeeper or an accountant that you wish to use. In fact, you don't even need to use a service provider if you wish to do your recovery plan by yourself. So option 1 is do your own recovery plan, no problem, fill it out, send it in. Option 2 is, if you wish, you could use your own bookkeeper or accountant, financial planner or lawyer. Those are the 4 categories to help you create the recovery plan. If you wish that person to receive some compensation for their time, they need to register with Small Business BC, and how to register is right in the middle of our website. There's a link there where they can hit an expression of interest email, and then they'll be guided through that registration process. And then the third way, if you don't wish to do your own recovery plan and you don't have a bookkeeper or a financial planner, we will actually guide you through this. So in your application, it will say, I wish to be referred for a service provider, and then you will automatically be supported and matched with someone to help you create your recovery plan. So you don't need to worry about that. We'll manage that. That part of the process is being delivered by our partners at Small Business BC. And so they do all the vetting of the service providers, and then they'll match you with someone. So worry not, you don't need to put in any effort into that. As far as templates go, we do have a few kind of best practices that we've seen. To be honest, everyone is very focused. I would say these are general themes on marketing, of course, right? on any sort of renovations in the space. So patio building, probably things that you've already done, but you know, plexiglass screens and all of that. For hotels, I can't think of anything that would make a really good template. I've been hesitant, and maybe this is my fault, I've been hesitant to post a whole list of ideas because we want to be inclusive. We want to say yes to all the creative ideas that all of you have. And so I didn't want to exclude thinking. So honestly, I encourage you, be creative, do what you think is best for your business, put it in the recovery plan. If we think it's not really within the principles or guidelines of the program, we'll just come back and work with you to improve the recovery plan. We have not said no to any recovery plans. We are absolutely saying yes to all. It's just providing a bunch of support, sometimes more than others. So I hope that helps. Don't really have.
I think so. I have a question here. When, as a limited partnership, no T2 returns are filed, only T5013 information return is filed.
I saw that question too. Yeah, that's a question for on-staff accountant. I think take a look at the documents list. I looked too. Shareholders register is really what's needed, and then perhaps a notice of assessment should be enough to meet the T requirements. But if you send me a note, and I'm happy to share my email address, then I can put you in touch with our on-staff accountant. Great, thank you. My pleasure. All right, I think we're pretty much at the end of my presentation. Go ahead. Is the sole proprietorships eligible for either of these grants? Yes, absolutely, they are. You do need to be registered with BC Registries. I believe it's about $75 or $100. It's a 2 to 3 day turnaround. If you aren't registered, that's okay for the business recovery grant. You can register and then come back. It's not, unfortunately, okay for the circuit breaker because we had to put in a date, February 1st, 2021 for that one. So if you're not registered with BC Registries, you won't be able to proceed for circuit breaker, but you can for the recovery grant. But yes, sole proprietors, please do apply. Great. Oh, I have so many questions here about ownership outside of British Columbia. I know, I'm sorry. I wish I had a magic wand for so many reasons. So Elizabeth, can we ask you, and you know, I literally have so many around ownership and new businesses here in our list of pre-submitted questions. So if there's an opportunity for you to go back and say, you know, is there going to be reconsideration around ownership? Or is it, you know, dead in the water, so to speak? I think people need to know that, and certainly many people have asked. And then again, with new businesses, if you're looking at business recovery investments, my goodness, they've already invested in business recovery because they've built a new business in British Columbia, and our ask would be that that would be reconsidered. I know. I'm very happy to take those two items away. My gut is telling me that Treasury Board is not interested in any more amendments to this program. I'm sorry to deliver perhaps the bad news, but I always believe in being honest and transparent. But I will ask again, absolutely. Thank you. And then is there a list of the kinds of investments or expenses that are eligible? I have a couple of questions saying, you know, can I can I fix my pool, or is it for rehiring, or is it for training when I'm hiring people to get ready to go, or what are the parameters for eligibility? Yeah, great question. As mentioned, I don't have a comprehensive list because we didn't want to exclude creativity, but I recognize that means it's hard to know what the parameters actually are. So ideally it is investing in anything in your business. So pool renovations, great, where it will help your business not just recover, but ideally thrive in the new world that hopefully we're stepping into at some point soon. So that's a very general answer. I would suggest everything from, yes, pool renovations to patio renovations. You can rehire staff. You can use some of this funding for wages. We do ask that that's kind of a last resort because, of course, there's the federal wage subsidy program. But you can use part of this grant for wages, no problem. Just try not to make it 100% because we'll come back and ask, why aren't you accessing the federal grant, the federal wage subsidy program? So just take a bit of extra time. Right. I think when I think of hotels, and I so miss and love hotels, everything from, I'm hearing deep cleaning going on, and you've probably already done this, so forgive me if these aren't very good ideas, but deep cleaning of an empty hotel is such a phenomenal time. Absolutely, you could use the grant funding for that. That will help recover your business and ultimately thrive. So get creative for sure.
Great. Okay, I have another question here. I have a new business that has 18 months of operations, but barely. As a new business, we were investing a lot into marketing and some capital expenses in our first year, which means while we had positive cash flow, our financials show a loss in the first full year, which ended December 2019. The criteria for the recovery grant says we need positive cash flow. We have lots of inbound cash flow, but our expenses as a new business were higher. Does this disqualify us from this grant?
It doesn't. No, great question. And it took us a while to figure out how to support businesses in your situation. So no, it sounds like you're a good candidate. Showing positive cash flow, especially just starting off, is amazing. But totally understood that perhaps a negative overall revenue loss makes perfect sense as well. So does not disqualify you. By all means, please apply. Other businesses in the same situation have been successful in getting the grant.
Great. Here's another one. Are we allowed to change our submitted recovery plan? Can we resubmit?
You can. You're absolutely allowed to change. What I would suggest is, and I'm noticing this with other businesses, their original plans in the recovery plan have now changed because life around us keeps changing, right? The pandemic keeps changing. And so what I would suggest is you're empowered to make the best business decisions that you can and invest that money you think is best. Just hang on to those receipts. And if we do a spot audit and come back to you, it'd be no problem for you to say, well, my plan was to do X, but things changed, so I had to do Y, and here is where I invested the money. That's really all you need to do. We don't need multiple copies of the recovery plan. Don't worry about that. This really isn't, it's not supposed to be an enforcement or auditing program. So just don't worry about sending us another recovery plan. It's fine. Just do what you think is best for your business.
Great. Here's another one. My husband and I own and operate our business, and we collect dividends from the business. We have only one other employee. In the application, does this mean that our business has 1 or 3 employees?
That is a great question, which I should know the answer to. So let me take that away and ask the adjudication team how they are applying that. So leave that with me, please.
Okay. Can you have 2 different recovery plans for the small business recovery grant, one for the main grant and a separate for the tourism top off? We've had to pivot part of our operations, but have an idea to reach out more to tourism as well.
There's no need to have 2 recovery plans. You could just put it into the one plan and just have separate line items for each portion is totally fine. I love this thought, and it's great the rigor that you're all putting into the recovery plans. Once again, don't spend hours on them and don't overthink it. Just put in a few lines for the grant as a whole or the base grant and the tourism top up. That's fine. And we'll look at it and you'll be good to go.
Here's one about when we're reopening here, would property beautification such as hanging flower baskets and all of our bedding plants qualify? Under normal circumstances, they would invest, no doubt, if you have a property with, you know, a park-like setting. So if that would be
Right.
a normal operating cost, would that be included?
I would, yes, I would call it, you know, landscaping or something that sounds more substantial than perhaps annuals that last a couple weeks. But absolutely, I would include that, and that sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, here's another one. When a 30+ year BC incorporated company with deep community and philanthropic minded values is not eligible for these programs, it will result in a net negative outcome for everyone. We very much appreciate your lobbying efforts to make Eligibility BC incorporated businesses eligible.
I know.
You've agreed to already take that one back, but
I know it's so hard. I know these rules are never perfect, and I know. Yeah, I've definitely learned through all of this experience, I'm sure all of you have too, how difficult it is to make decisions in the moment, right? I don't wish my life away, but I can't wait to look back on this time and see with greater clarity what has gone well and what hasn't. So I feel the frustration, I understand. And I know that's an exceptional business case. I will absolutely ask again, no problem.
thank you. What would we need to provide documentation-wise on what we've spent the recovery grant on?
Just receipts would be great. You know, an invoice or even a credit card receipt, whatever shows that the money was spent appropriately. As we all know, programs like this really attract fraud. We have had some fraudulent applications, absolutely. And so just basic receipts are all that we need.
What are the biggest challenges with the criteria for this grant for tourism accommodation operators? Is it sort of all the documentation, or what have you found, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think initially in the early days, the biggest challenge was our definition of tourism. It was far too restrictive, and perhaps many of you found that it was really, you know, all about international tourism and no business travel or anything. So that I'm thankful to say we fixed. Perhaps now, just to keep saying this, would be the investors from outside the province would be the biggest challenge. Other than that, like I said, the tourism top-up side anyway is very generous and supportive. So it's really just an attestation and shouldn't be a challenge at all. Other than that, nothing comes to mind. The documentation is sometimes a challenge regardless of industry. So I wouldn't think of that as tourism specific.
Great. What can be done to support businesses in labor hire and funds in times of volatility in occupancies for accommodation sector? The volatility can give rise to over or under hiring. Are grants eligible to subsidize? I suppose you spoke about the preference to use SUs and top up with these grants. Is that your direction?
It is, please, yes. And once again, I feel that pain. I used to manage a restaurant while going to school, and I remember every day is a challenge, right? To get labor just right. It's very hard not to have too many staff on or too few. So I know the pain of that, but yes, that is the direction. Grants ideally should be invested in recovery, and wages is kind of a last resort.
Right. Okay, here's a little bit of a longer question, and it might be a comment more than a question. Thank you for your support of our industry. However, 20,000 of the recovery grant, if we ever get it, so it sounds like that might be an application underway, pays our utilities. So the 20,000 pays your utilities for a 151 room hotel for about a month. The other 20,000 pays our property tax and insurance for 1 month. While appreciated, this is hardly helping recovery when our business is down 70% or more, and travel restrictions, event restrictions, dining restrictions continue to strangle our industry. Respectfully, it's a drop in the bucket. Please rethink your support. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, thank you for the honesty once again. And I agree. I know it's a drop in the bucket and how frustrating that is. It's not going to help, but to understand the thinking. Provincial programs I'm learning, approach these things as an addition to any federal programs. And understandably, I guess governments don't want to duplicate programs or spend, double up on funds if they don't need to. And so this program was designed to be in addition to everything else that is provided by federal and other parts of the provincial government. You're right, it's not a single program could possibly solve all financial struggles right now. I totally agree.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Here's another one. Why is there no transparency on the recovery plan approval process? Who are these qualified professional service providers? Do they really understand our industry? Who gets to approve our recovery plan? Is there an appeal process? Where is the template for recovery plan? Why is the recovery plan example given on BC government website is a tiny 3-row and 3-column table only?
I'm sensing some frustration with the recovery plan. And if there's a specific business example, by all means, once again, reach out to me and I can look into it. As mentioned, we're actually not saying no to any recovery plans. It's also not, I mean, if full transparency is very welcome. If someone wants to come and hang out with an adjudicator and watch them read through, you're absolutely welcome. I promise you the intent was never to be opaque. The service provider concept was all about, and we're realizing this is true, that part of the business community really don't necessarily have financial acumen. They just haven't made the time. And I know it's many, many hours to run a business. So I'm not completely out of the loop on that, but they just didn't have the time or necessarily the expertise to create a business plan, which is essentially what the recovery plan is. It's a way to look ahead and think about how best to invest grant funding in a business. So great, lots of great questions in there. I'm trying to sort of make sure I answer them all. Service providers or accountants, bookkeepers, financial planners. I know lawyer seems like a strange one to have in there. That was to support businesses who are not viable and may need help supporting folding their business, to be honest. Promise you no interest at all in appearing to be opaque. You're absolutely welcome to know more about how we adjudicate a recovery plan. The adjudicators are on my team. I have about 55 of them. They have won those jobs. They actually all have backgrounds in applying government policy, and they're wonderful. I adore them. What else am I missing, Ingrid, in that question that would be good to know?
Is there an appeal process?
Right. There isn't, because we aren't saying no to anyone. So no.
Okay, so here's another one. If we currently do not qualify for the grants, should we still apply and be denied or not apply?
Yeah, great question. I think it depends. If the only thing that's going to benefit over time is that 18 months, right? So if you're right under the 18-month timeline for the recovery grant, a bit more time will help you. But other than that, if you're ineligible because of negative cash flow or ownership in BC, that's not really going to change. And so I don't see the point in applying. I'm sorry to say that, because we really want to be as inclusive as possible, as always. But I think it depends. Great job reading these out to you, Ingrid. Thank you for being a great co-facilitator. It's awesome.
You bet. What are the provisions for a supplier to the hospitality sector? Are they eligible for grants?
I saw that question and I wasn't totally sure what we meant. So like people with laundry or food or like.
Yeah, you know, I'll give you an idea. you know, the in-room amenities for an accommodator may be provided by, you know, a company in the Okanagan. And of course, nobody's been buying amenities because there's no business. So they are suffering because there's no supply chain for demand for their product.
Right. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. So yes, absolutely. Any registered business in the province can apply, certainly for the recovery grant. When it comes to the circuit breaker, I would have to take that away and find out if, and this gets very technical, but if the provincial health order technically applies to those suppliers. So I'd have to just ask the question of Bonnie's office. Yeah, absolutely. A business is a business, right? So definitely apply for the recovery grant, and I can find out about the circuit breaker too. I don't want to lose track of a few questions I'm looking into here.
Great. I'm just keeping my eye on the time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I have 3 or 4 questions.
Sure.
Yeah. We plan on implementing contactless check-in systems, but the recovery grant, even if approved, covers only the partial cost. Are we eligible to apply while we look for additional funding options?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What proof would be required for renovations that have not yet been started? Would an estimate by the contractor, would that do for the job be sufficient? What about marketing projects? How to prove the amount asked for is realistic?
Yeah, both great questions too. For the construction, you've actually got 9 months to invest the grant funds. When you receive a grant letter that has my name at the bottom, you'll see that that's the idealized timeline. So sure, a quote for the construction is good, but even better, hopefully you're able to spend the funding within the 9 months, and then we'll have the actual invoice or receipt for that, which is really good. For marketing, and I'm not sure if I understand the nuance of the question, is it you know, just enough to get a quote for marketing, or do we also need the receipt? Is that the essence of the question, Ingrid?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I understand when you're trying to fill out a recovery plan, it's sort of guessing sometimes, right? I don't know, how much is marketing?
Yeah.
So do the best that you can to guess. If there is time to find a quote, that's great. We're seeing marketing costs all over the map, so we'll trust you that that is well and true. And then, yes, when it comes time to actually spending the funds, just keep those receipts.
Great. Okay, here's a clarification question. I thought you had said that a negative cash flow wasn't an item that would make you ineligible, but now you just said we should not bother applying. Can you clarify this, please?
No problem. Negative cash flow will make you ineligible to apply. The example I heard, and maybe this is building on the business example we heard, which was demonstration of positive cash flow, but a loss because of investment into the business, that's no problem. So it's really about cash flow, to be honest. Negative cash flow does make a business ineligible. Positive makes it eligible. Hopefully I'm clearer on that.
Okay. Maybe even ineligible properties should apply so that government may have an idea of how many businesses have been left out.
I know. It's so interesting, and I feel that frustration. I hear you. What's puzzling is like applications for both programs have kind of dropped off. And so, and I recognize some of the reasons for that, right? The eligibility criteria that doesn't necessarily fit with each industry. But it's hard for government to reconcile that. Like applications have dropped off, but we hear how many need it. And so we're trying to sort of wrap our heads around that. But I hear you, by all means, go for it. If you wish, you know, you're free to apply. Absolutely.
We have another one, although we have addressed this a couple of times, but you know, I'm going to read it out for this participant. I'm an Albertan with businesses in BC. So I don't qualify for both the BC grants because of residence criteria and the Alberta grant out of province business location. Does the messaging for the small business grant mean I should only invest in the province I reside in?
I know it's frustrating. I was born in Alberta and grew up there, and we're all Canadians, so it shouldn't matter. But it's a good comment. Is that the messaging? No, I mean, that's not what the intent is. It's like I said, it's more taxpayer perception, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you know, I think, Elizabeth, to not belabor this point, but it's very interesting and but more disappointing than interesting of what we're hearing is there is no analysis or acknowledgement of contribution and investment in communities by businesses. So when we think about an accommodator within a community, very often it's the centerpiece, and then many small businesses can grow up around it because of the demand that an accommodator will generate. So we have examples of one small business in rural BC that when they had to close, 14 other small businesses had to close as well because there was no business left. And so when we think about economic recovery, and we think about innovation, and we think about contribution and the crisis that we currently are in, I think the frustration around these barriers, which we've been able to identify really clearly, that are not being reconsidered or that there isn't new messaging or acknowledgement that their contribution is greater than these relief measures and that they're worth investing in. It's very difficult to take when we're right in the middle of a crisis and we currently have travel restrictions and we don't have an opening plan yet. And there's so much uncertainty that people's frustration and the livelihood that they have spent many years building is really at risk. And the risk isn't that they're not running solid businesses that have been around for many years. It's purely that there is a fence around eligibility. And you know, that is the disappointment, because as we look to innovate, recover, and continue to contribute to the BC economy, you know, it's a very different landscape and we're made up of many different forms. And without all those different forms, we're not that rich ecosystem of hospitality. So, you know, I think this is where this frustration is coming from, is that, you know, we could help you reframe the framework so for eligibility and there would be minimal risk. So we don't believe it's risk focused. It just feels it's more ideological, which is very difficult to understand.
I know, and that's very well said. I hear it completely. Yes, I know.
Are you able to answer question for BC increased employment incentive? Do you know what that question is, Elizabeth?
I don't. I'm sorry, I don't. I'm happy to have, yeah.
Dan, can you just be a little more specific with your question? And we have about 5 minutes left, so.
I'm also very heads down in this program, and I don't tend to be a super great resource right now, but go for it.
Yes, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, so the question was, there was a BC increase employment incentive started actually last, I think the beginning of last month, I guess. They put it in as in July, August, and September, 3 months. And then, so 3 months of wage, and then whatever you increase in September, October, and November, 3 months. So every quarter, so they compare the quarter from July, August, September, and compare the quarter of the next quarter, which is September, November, I guess. No, sorry, July, August, September, and then they do that October, November, December, sorry. That's how it goes. They compare how much you increase in the October, November, December. Like in employment wise, so you hire more people, you should hire the more people in October, November, and December, right? That's the whole idea was that, right? But the reason, they did it, but the more problem is July, August, and September was, everything was normal a little bit, right? The economy kind of back on track during those 3 months. But then slack again in October, November, and December, where we got less revenues coming up. So we actually reduced the staff. Most places like restaurants and the hotel industry, this program was designed, wasn't qualifying anybody. So my answer to that was like, can we do that to a January, February, and March? Those are typical months where most of the revenues are pretty normal. And then we compare to a March, April, May, or compare to July, August, September, because then everybody has employed back actually by July, August, September. So that was the question. Is not related to these two, but yeah.
Okay. And forgive me, because I'm so heads down in this program, I'm not very aware of other programs. I'm sort of a terrible resource for you on that, but I can ask a staff member to look into it. When it comes to this program, if we're talking about showing revenue loss because due to wages, certainly we can move the timelines around if it's for a seasonal business, which sounds like perhaps you are. And so that would be no problem. The adjudicators can look at your books and do their best to support that sort of timeline adjustment based on seasonality. I hope that helps a bit.
Yes, yeah, I'll send these questions to the incentive program guys directly.
Perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, normally I'm aware of everything else going on, but mine.
And there are many programs, and I think one of the challenges we have right now is many small and medium-sized business operators, because they're operating at such a minimal level, they have a very small workforce, and they have people doing all kinds of, it's not like just because there's no business they don't have anything to do. They're actually doing all kinds of things they wouldn't normally be doing.
I know.
It's extremely difficult to be spending the time and having the expertise to try to fill out and figure out which of these programs, is the most beneficial.
I agree. I know.
Yeah.
It's one reason why we have offered that service provider service to actually help people fill out the application itself for the grant program, because we recognize just how even busier people are, even though bookings have dropped off. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a very nice comment here, Elizabeth. Your comments are awesome. You really captured the crux of the issues and frustrations succinctly. I think that might be for me with my comment to you. But, we'd like to thank you very much for making yourself available and being open to, to follow up with some of the people on the call today with their issues. Your willingness to go back to Treasury and to be able to implore your minister or others to acknowledge the livelihood of these companies that will contribute for a long, long time. If we can save them today, will be worth that investment. If there's a way that we can change the eligibility, we really appreciate your direct and supportive, clear comments about the process for both of these relief measures. And we really acknowledge your commitment to the industry to make yourself available. So thank you very, very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you. It was a total honor. Anytime.
Yeah. Okay. And for everybody on the call, our time is now up. I think we've got a half a minute. So I will wind it up, and I will let you know once again that it is being recorded. We'll take the slide deck and the chat and the questions and the recording, and we'll send that out with our communique on Thursday this week. So thank you very much for participating, and we're here to support you, doing everything that we can. Thanks so much, and take care of yourselves.